Welcome back. In this video, we will be going over the remaining lines of Form 1040. In the previous tax credits video, we skipped line 13, which we will go over now. Line 13 is for the qualified business deduction, and upon deducting it, the taxpayer will arrive at their taxable income. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, introduced in 2018 a qualified business income, QBI deduction, that permits pass-through businesses to be taxed on only 80% of their income. This QBI deduction was necessary to keep pass-through business tax rates reasonably in line with corporate tax rates, which were reduced to 21% under TCJA. The core of the qualified pass-through business income deduction is that shareholders or owners will simply be permitted to deduct 20% of the business income against itself, which will be claimed as a below-the-line after adjusted gross income deduction for tax purposes and entered here on line 13. Line 14 is for adding 12 to the taxpayer's total itemized or standard deduction plus 13, which was the qualified business deduction. Line 15 is for subtracting line 14, the taxpayer's total itemized deductions from line 11, the taxpayer total AGI. Line 16 is for entering tax. The IRS provides tax tables to make it easier for certain taxpayers to figure their income tax due. A taxpayer with $100,000 or more in taxable income will not be able to use the tax tables and must use the tax computation worksheet. Based on the tax return that we have been filling out for Emily Green, we see that the total is $4,411, and we will enter that on line 16. Line 17 is for Schedule 2, line 3. Going to Schedule 2, we see that the total from Part 1 is the amount that will be entered on Form 1040, line 17. Line 1 of Schedule 2 is for the alternative minimum tax, which is designed to keep wealthy taxpayers from using loopholes to avoid paying taxes. To figure if a taxpayer owes the AMT, alternative minimum tax, they will fill out Form 6251. To compensate for inflation, the AMT includes an exemption amount which is adjusted for inflation. The form begins by using adjusted gross income from Form 1040. Many of the taxes the taxpayer was allowed to deduct are added back to their income for the AMT. If the tax calculated is higher than what was calculated on Form 1040, then the difference must be paid as AMT. For example, let's say we have two taxpayers who are filing jointly with an alternative minimum tax of $394,600. The exemption amount, which is adjusted annually for inflation, of $114,600 for the tax year, will be subtracted, giving the minimum tax base of $280,000. For purposes of this example only, let us say that for the current tax year, the AMT applies at a rate of 28% to the excess of $199,000 for married filing jointly taxpayers. Up to $199,000 will be taxed at the amount of 26%, which is $51,740. The remaining amount, which is $280,000 minus $199,000, the part that was already taxed, is subject to the rate of 28%, which equals $22,680. Add up the amounts to get the total alternative minimum tax. Emily's income is under the amount for which she must pay AMT, so she does not need to fill out Form 6251. Line 2 of Schedule 2 is for the excess advanced premium tax credit repayment. The premium tax credit, also known as the PTC, is a refundable credit that helps eligible individuals and families cover the premiums for their health insurance purchased through the health insurance marketplace. Line 2 of Schedule 2 is used to report the excess of the advanced premium tax credit. Line 3 is to add up lines 1 and 2 together, and then the total is entered on Form 1040, line 17. Emily did not have anything to enter on any of these lines, so her total is 0. Back on Form 1040, line 18, it's an add line for lines 16 and 17. On line 21, we add up line 19 and 20. On line 22, we subtract line 21 from 18, and we get less than 0, so we enter 0. Line 23 of Form 1040 is the amount from line 21 of Schedule 2, which is the total of other taxes. And so we will go back to Schedule 2 to fill out the second part. Line 4 of Schedule 2 is for the self-employment tax. How to fill out Schedule SE is detailed in the small business course. Though for right now, we'll take the amount from Emily's Schedule SE. This amount is $1,056. Line 5 of Schedule 2 is for Social Security and Medicare tax on unreported tip income. Unreported Social Security and Medicare tax from two sources, tips and wages, will be calculated and entered on this line. IRS Form 4137 is used to calculate the amount of Social Security and Medicare tax owed on tip income that was not reported to an employer, including any allocated tips shown on Forms W-2. Line 6, Schedule 2, is for uncollected Social Security and Medicare tax on wages. IRS Form 8919, uncollected Social Security and Medicare tax on wages, is used to pay Social Security and Medicare tax on wages received from a firm when the taxpayer is deemed to be an employee of the firm and not an independent contractor, and if the firm did not withhold the taxes from the taxpayer's wages. Line 7 is used to add up lines 5 and 6. We will now move on to line 8. An additional tax may be triggered by an early distribution of an IRA or other tax-deferred retirement account, excess contributions of a traditional or Roth IRA, Cloverdale ESA, Archer Medical Savings Account, or Health Savings Account, or failure to take a minimum distribution from a retirement plan. This is entered here. Line 9 is for household employee taxes. If the taxpayer hired someone to do household work and was able to control what work they did and how they did it, then the taxpayer had a household employee. Once the taxpayer determines that the household employment taxes will need to be paid, then Schedule H, household employment taxes, will need to be completed and filed. The instructions to Schedule H and form can be reviewed, which include the wage limits used to determine if Schedule H must be filed. Line 10 is for repayment of the first-time homebuyer credit. A taxpayer whose income falls into certain limits is able to take a tax credit for the first time they buy a home. If the taxpayer sells a home within 4 years of buying the home, then they must pay back some of the credit. The amount they must pay back is calculated on IRS Form 5405, and the taxpayer will enter the total that must be paid on Schedule 2, Line 10. Line 11 of Schedule 2 is the additional Medicare tax. A taxpayer may be subject to a 0.9 additional Medicare tax that applies to Medicare wages, Railroad Retirement Act compensation, and self-employment income over a threshold based on their filing status. IRS Form 8959, additional Medicare tax, is used to report the additional tax. The threshold is adjusted annually, and the current threshold is discussed in the updates reading portion of this course. Line 12 of Schedule 2 is for the net investment income tax of Form 8960. NIIT is a 3.8% tax on the lesser of net investment income or the excess of an individual's modified adjusted gross income over a threshold amount. IRS Form 8960, Net Investment Income Tax, Individuals, Estates, and Trusts, is used to report this tax. Calculating the net investment income tax for individuals is a 4-step process. 1. Calculate by how much modified adjusted gross income exceeds the relevant threshold. 2. Calculate net investment income for the year. 3. Take the lesser of the amounts in step 1 or step 2. 4. Multiply the amount in step 3 by 3.8%, the net investment income tax rate. Line 13 of Schedule 2 is for uncollected Social Security and Medicare, or RRTA tax on tips. This tax should be shown in Box 12 of Form W-2 with codes A and B, or M and N. Line 14 is for interest on tax due on installment income from the sale of certain residential lots. Interest on tax due on installment income from the sale of certain residential lots and timeshares are entered here. Line 15 is for interest on the deferred tax on gain from certain installment sales. Enter interest on the deferred tax on gain from certain installment sales with a sales price over $150,000. Line 16 is for the recapture of low-income housing credit. Form 8611, Recapture of Low-Income Housing Credit, is used to recapture part of the low-income housing credit that a taxpayer claimed in previous years because the qualified basis decreased from one year to the next, or the taxpayer disposed of a building or their interest and they did not follow the procedures that would have prevented recapture of the credit. Line 17 is for entering other additional taxes. Other additional taxes are listed on this line, and they include recapture of other credits, recapture of federal mortgage subsidy, and other various additional taxes. Line 18 is a total line, totaling 17A through 17Z. Line 19 is a reserved for future use line. This line was used in 2021 to report tax on excess advanced child tax credits that were available in 2021. Line 20 is for Section 965 Net Tax Liability Installment from Form 965A. The IRC Section 965 Net Tax Liability Installment Form 965A, Individual Report of Net Tax Liability, should be used by individual taxpayers and entities taxed like individuals, for example, certain trusts and estates. This form is used to report a taxpayer's net 965 tax liability for each tax year in which a taxpayer must report or pay Section 965 amounts. Now, what is Section 965? It's a transition tax on the untaxed foreign earnings of certain specified foreign corporations as if those earnings had been earned in the United States. For additional information on what Form 965A is, see the reading material. Line 21 is used to add lines 4, 7 through 16, and 18. This amount is transferred to Form 1040, line 23. We will now go back to Form 1040, line 23, which is the amount from Schedule 2, line 21. This amount is $1,056 for Emily. Line 24 is used to add lines 22 and 23 of Form 1040. Form 1040, line 25A through 25D, federal income tax withheld from either A, Forms W-2, B, Forms 1099, C, other forms, and D is an add line for 25A through 25C. The taxpayer's federal income tax withheld from Form W-2, Form 1099, and other forms is entered here. It may include backup withholdings and special refunds of Social Security tax. The amount withheld is a credit that offsets the total tax imposed. Line 25D is a total lie. Emily had $4,500 federal income tax withheld on her Form W-2. And so we're going to enter that information on line 25A and total it on 25D. Form 1040 line 26 is for 2022 estimated tax payments and amounts applied from a 2021 return. This is 0 for Emily. Line 27 to 31 was filled out previously in the tax credits video, so we're going to skip that. Going to Form 1040 line 32, add lines 27A and 28 through line 31. This equals 0 here. On Form 1040 line 33, we're going to add lines 25D, 26, and 32. And this equals 4,500 here. On Form 1040 line 34, line 24 is subtracted from line 33, which ends up with the amount overpaid in taxes. If the taxpayer is entitled to a refund, see the form instructions for information on having it directly deposited into one or more of their accounts or to purchase U.S. savings bonds instead of receiving a paper check. If there is a balance due on the tax return, the balance due must generally be paid by the original due date of the return to avoid any accrual of penalties or interest. If a taxpayer cannot pay a tax balance due in full by the due date, then IRS Form 9465 Installment Agreement Request is used to request a monthly installment plan. It is highly recommended that they pay a portion of the amount they owe and request an installment for the remaining balance. When a taxpayer chooses to have their tax refund electronically deposited to 2 or 3 accounts at banks or other financial institutions, they can complete IRS Form 8888, Allocation of Refunds. When e-filing a tax return, use IRS Form 8453, U.S. Individual Income Tax Transmittal for an IRS e-file, and send any required paper forms or supporting documentation listed next to the checkboxes on IRS Form 8453. Do not attach any form or document that's not shown next to the checkboxes. If a taxpayer is required to mail in any documentation that's not listed on IRS Form 8453, they cannot file the tax return electronically. Well, that wraps up filling out Form 1040. Thank you for watching.